why you should not buy a home. Ted is here. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Okay, Ted, welcome back. So the most common financial advice I've heard for the last 500 years, I might be exaggerating, is that the foundation of your financial plan should be owning a home. Have you heard the same thing?
Well, not for 500 years, but...
Yeah, I'm a little older than you. So today we're going to present the opposite view.
Okay.
So we'll get everybody all yelling at us on YouTube
no doubt
that we don't understand what we're talking about. And just in the interest of full disclosure, we both own homes. Well, our spouses
own our homes for tax planning and liability issues.
But we live in, we live in homes. We understand,
right.
But we're going to present the opposite viewpoint first. But first, let's look at the conventional wisdom here. Right. This is why you should own a home. So what pops into your head? What are the reasons?
Because you got to live someplace.
Okay, there you go.
And at some point, if you are making payments towards purchasing a home, you're going to be done making the payments and you may live in rent-free because you own the house.
So those would be the two obvious answers for why you should own a home.
Right.
So other things I can think about is the landlord can't kick you out.
Right.
And so
your wife could. Well, that's a different conversation.
But that can happen in a rental as well. But rent evictions were a big thing, and I guess still are to a certain extent. Well, if you own the home, they can't do that.
Right.
You have pets.
I do.
Harder to do in a rental accommodation, perhaps.
Certainly. Yeah, usually there are restrictions, particularly on the size of them. I mean, we have 3 dogs. You'd have a hard place finding a rental for 3 dogs.
Whereas if you own the place, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
And I guess you can do whatever you want with everything. So you want to paint the walls blue, you can paint the walls blue.
Take out that wall over there, put in new windows. It all costs money, but
it's your place.
You're spending it on yourself.
You can do whatever rentals you want.
Right.
So let's hit the financial reasons why you would buy a home.
Right.
And so you already, I think you
alluded to this. Yeah, you're building equity.
Building equity.
So as opposed to rent where you're just paying the landlord for him to pay his mortgage and do whatever they want with their stuff. You're paying yourself.
And we're going to talk a bit more about that on the other side of it.
Yep.
But I get it. Boomer logic would be, well, if you're paying rent, that's just wasting money. It's gone. At the end of the month, it's gone. Whereas if you're paying towards a mortgage, at least some of it is going towards principal.
Right.
Therefore, you're building equity. You have more control over your monthly costs. If you have a 5-year mortgage, for example, for the next 5 years what your mortgage payments are going to be.
Unless you got a variable rate mortgage.
Yeah, if it's a variable rate, then obviously I'm talking about a locked-in 5-year. But yes, if you got a variable rate mortgage, then forget about it. What I just said is completely wrong. The ability to retire with no mortgage, and therefore you're living rent-free when you're done. That's pretty good.
Well, so you've got a third of Canadians that basically live that way, a third of Canadians that are living paycheck to paycheck, and a third of Canadians are in a lot of trouble. So,
and you kind of want to be in the good third, I guess.
That's so it's old school. The ones that got there first, right. So the third that are okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So our advice is go back to 1950 and buy a house. That's our advice today.
That's right. It costs you $3,000.
Yeah. And you'll be fine. You don't even have to go back to 1950, 1990, the year 2000,
right.
2015.
Last week it was a bad idea, but
yeah, today, who knows? So do you agree that a mortgage is a forced savings plan?
Yeah, to some extent that's true. Assuming that real estate goes up over time, you're making money 2 ways. You're paying back part of the principal, which effectively gives you a savings account on your equity in the house, and the house is hopefully appreciating in value, which increases your investment.
Well, and you hit on the other obvious one, real estate goes up.
Right.
And over a long enough time period, that's true.
Yep.
Although,
or at least it has been.
It has been. I mean, there may be some location-specific things there. If you'd bought a home in Detroit 20 years ago,
Love
30
Canal.
years ago,
is that what you're thinking?
It may not have gone up in value, but any major city in Canada, it's probably going to go up in value over a long enough period of time.
Right.
It also, having a mortgage helps your credit.
Certainly does, because you've got some sort of asset that they can attach to give you better interest rates, and it means they tend to think that you're more financially secure.
Keep that thought in mind, because we're going to come back to that one as well.
Right. And
then I guess the final point is why you should buy a home is that it insulates you against insolvency.
Yeah, this might be a chicken and egg thing. I'm not sure.
Exactly. So So what I'm alluding to, of course, is the Hoyes-Michaelis Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, which is sort of in the sort of 5, 6, 7% range now, which means the vast majority of our clients who file an insolvency don't own a home.
Now, it hasn't always been that way.
No, it was up to a third of our clients back in 2011. Now, you said it's a chicken and an egg thing. So why is that? It's not owning the home that prevented the insolvency. It's the fact that you own the home that...
So owning the home might actually be an indicator of a different mindset towards spending. So as opposed to, going on lots of expensive trips or whatever, you spend the money on your house, which you're reinvesting in yourself, so to speak.
But it could also be what you said earlier. I bought the house 20 years ago.
Right. And it's just gone up.
It's just gone up in value. So even though I've got lots of other debt, I can refinance and everything is fine. So I think that's probably a lot of the truth as well. Okay, so we've presented both the first side of the argument, the conventional wisdom.
Why do you buy a house?
Why do you buy a house? And all of those things are perfectly reasonable.
Because your wife wants a house.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that. So let's now do the main part of the show, which is reasons not to buy a home.
Right.
So pick whatever one you want to start with. What is a reason that owning a home or a condo is a bad idea?
Well, let's use an example from the last couple of years. If you bought at the wrong time recently, house prices there have been corrections in different markets. So prices have actually gone down short term. And so if you fully mortgaged something, 18 months ago and you tried to sell it now, you might be 10% lower than what you bought it for.
Yes. And so obviously people will be watching this show many years in the future because that's just the way Debt Free in 30 is. But yes, timing matters.
Right.
So I told the story in my book, Straight Talk on Your Money, which of course is a wonderful book that everyone should read. And I told the story of how in 1989, I bought my first house.
Right.
It was a townhouse. And I thought I was really smart because I thought, well, the market has peaked and it, peaked a year ago and I'm getting in at considerably less than other people in this townhouse complex had paid, which was true. But I paid $205,000 for that unit and I sold it 7 years later for $20,000 less than I paid for it.
That's a great return.
Fantastic return. Doug Hoyes, the financial
genius. That's why you
genius.
like Bitcoin so much.
There you go. Buy Bitcoin. It never goes down. So if the house prices go down, that's the point.
That's the lesson you have to learn.
That's the point. And so your example was, well, in 2020, we started this, big increase in real estate prices. But then when you hit 2023, kind of a bit of a peaking and a bit lower into 2024. So timing matters. House prices do not always go up in value.
Right.
So, and one of the reasons for that has to do with mortgage costs.
That's right. The interest rate's gone crazy in the last year or so because the government gave away boatloads of free money during the pandemic, and now somebody's got to pay the piper.
And it caused inflation and a whole bunch of other things. So according to my cue cards here, if you have a variable rate interest-only mortgage, which we would call a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, where all you're paying is interest, if the interest rate goes from 3% to 6%, your payment's double.
Let's do the math. Yep.
It's there you go, that your payment's double. Now, if you have a mortgage with an amortization, meaning the payments are going to stay the same for a period of time, if the 1 year rate back in 2020 was around 3%, and now it's, as we were recording this, well over 6%. So I punched it into the calculator, $800,000 mortgage.
Right.
So you bought $1 million house with 20% down. 25-year amortization at a 3% interest rate. You're looking at about $3,800 a month. At a 6% interest rate, you're looking at about $5,100, a little over $5,100 a month. So the interest rate doubled, but the payment didn't double.
Right. So that means you're not building the same amount of equity that you thought you were building before. That at least in your example, your payment is still exceeding what the interest actually is, isn't it?
That's right.
I mean, there are folks where the rates went to the point where they weren't making the payments.
Negative amortization.
Yep.
That's a big problem. Yeah, and in that example I gave, your payment went up by about $1,300 a month.
Oh, the interest portion went up.
This is what you're paying.
Right.
Obviously, you're right. Because when you're paying a mortgage payment, you are paying principal and interest.
Right.
And so that's why when interest rates double, your mortgage payment doesn't double.
but the amount of principal that you're paying off is halved. Well,
that's
whatever
right.
the number
is reduced. So it gets a bit confusing. But if you are paying a line of credit interest only, then your principal never changes.
Right.
So obviously, if the interest rate doubles, your payments double. But when you renegotiate a mortgage at a higher interest rate, well, then, and depending on the amortization periods, the payment doesn't double. However, the point is, there's a long-winded way of saying that. We'll edit that out in the final show. The point is, your mortgage payments can go up.
Right.
That's the point.
And it's beyond your control.
And because it's whatever the governor says, right? TIF,
Right.
whatever he says. Now, if you're renting, your rent can also go up.
It can, but to go up any larger than whatever the approved portion is, they've got to get permission from the rent tribunal. So generally speaking, rents go up at a very set rate, whatever that rate is publicly.
Yeah, and here in Ontario, which is where we're recording this, there is rent control on most units, but any unit that came into being after a certain date, I think it's 2018, but don't quote me on it, does not have rent control on it.
Right.
But you've probably got a 1-year lease. So at the end of that 1 year, if you're in a non-rent controlled thing, well, I guess your landlord can raise the rent, but you can also move.
Right.
But you're right. If you're in a rent controlled facility, well, if the increase is 2% or 3%, that's it. It's kind of locked in.
Although there are lots of landlords now making the application for increased because the costs between the inflation and interest rates on their mortgages, they're losing money.
Right. The landlord and tenant board is so backed up that takes a long time to happen, which is why the common trick is, well, I'm moving my family in.
Right.
So here's your form. You got to leave. And I'll move my family in for a couple of days or a month or whatever the rules are, and then boom, I can lease it
somebody else. Yep.
So, not buying a home, you don't get hit with the mortgage problem, but you do get hit with other problems. So we're not this is not all perfect.
Right.
Now, if I've got a 5-year amortization or 5 years left on my mortgage, 5 years till it comes up for renewal, and I decide I want to move.
And then you got to break a contract.
And how does that work? I got to pay penalties.
Yeah, typically it's a 3-month interest penalty at least. So whatever you would have paid them in interest for those 3 months, you're going to pay as a penalty just right off the top.
And again, every mortgage might be slightly different. Yep. So read your mortgage agreement and see how it works. But what that means then is a house that you own is an anchor.
Well, yeah. You can't just up and move.
And whereas if you're renting, well, I guess if you've got a 1-year lease,
you can't move until the end of the lease unless you can sublet it or you're willing to break the lease and go to, Australia or something.
Right. Well, and I guess if rental rates are going up, your landlord's happy to have you break the lease then.
Right.
Fine, no problem, off you go. But you're probably not going to sign a 1-year rental lease on one day and then the next day decide to move. You're probably a few months into it. Right. So, okay, fine. I guess I'm going to be living here for a few more months.
I'm going to run out the clock.
Run out the clock. So the costs are a lot less in that particular case.
And it's a hell of a lot simpler. I mean, if you decide you're going to move from a rental, okay, I got to find a new place to live and pack. You're going to sell your house. It's a lot more complicated. There's more steps involved.
And when you sell your house, again, back to point 1, it may actually be worth less than what you paid for it.
It's possible.
And in fact, it's kind of much more likely in the short term, because if the costs of selling the house are, let's say, 5%, real estate commissions could be more if you got a penalty to break the mortgage and legal fees and all the rest of it. Well, even if your house went up by 5% since you bought it, you're still breaking even.
Right.
It only went up by 4%, you're losing money.
Yep.
So as a result, and this is much more common in the United States because they have really long mortgages.
Well, in the U.S., they don't do the same renewals that we do here. So you get a contract on your mortgage, and if you want to break that, you get a new mortgage with somebody else. So they do 25, 30 years, and they expect you to just pay it for the 25 or 30 years.
And so if you got a mortgage when the rates were really low and you've locked in for 25 years, I don't want to move.
Ever.
Because
they won't port the mortgage. It's not the same thing down there.
And what does porting mean?
Porting means you're taking the mortgage from your old house to the new house. And Canadian banks are pretty happy to do that as long as your rates are comparable to whatever the market rates are.
Well, and I guess they make money.
Right.
So
it's all about making money.
We don't want you selling the place, paying the 3-month penalty, and then getting a new mortgage from someone else. We'd rather you port it to your new place. Yep. And if your new place is a little more expensive, well, maybe we're going to top it up.
Right.
So everybody's making money.
And that's actually the real reason they've got penalties on breaking mortgages when you sell. It's because they want you to port it to the new place because they've already built into their whole financial system that you're going to keep paying them for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it's more expensive to get a new customer, less expensive to not get a new customer.
Right.
So that's obviously much more important. So okay, it costs money to move. So as a result, I think it tends to be a bit of an anchor. And so you want to go get that new job in Alberta. If you're renting, a lot easier to do.
Right.
Now, the other factor we haven't talked about is maintenance. So you own a house and there's always something going wrong.
Well, if nothing else, you got to cut the damn lawn.
Yeah, and the roof is going to leak.
And shovel the walks.
Something's going to happen.
Appliances are going to break.
And even if you're living in a condo, okay, you don't have to cut the grass and do all those other things.
But you're paying a monthly fee for all of that.
Right.
So it's still...
You're paying one way or the other.
Right.
Whereas with your rent, well, okay, it's all built in.
But it's the landlord's problem.
It's the landlord's
problem. If the toilet backs up and floods the bathroom and destroys the floor and the ceiling of the unit below you, the landlord has to fix it, not you.
Yeah, and hopefully you've got renter's insurance anyways, just so there's
that's a different conversation.
a backup on it. But yeah, plumbing, heating, the roof, the yard,
appliances.
I mean, all sorts of stuff can go wrong. If you're renting, you don't have to worry about that.
Well, not even that it can go wrong, it will go wrong. You need to know that when you own something like a house, a long-term asset, you got to budget for all those things because you're going to have to paint at some point. You're going to have to do the roof.
Well, and I'm of the view that a house isn't an asset.
Right.
I am of the view that it is a consumer good, like a toothbrush.
It's a very big toothbrush.
A very big toothbrush. But what is a toothbrush? Well, I use it, and then when it's used up, I throw it away and I get another one.
Right.
And people would say, well, that's silly. My house is 100 years old. It'll still be here in 100 years. Okay. But think about it. That 100-year-old house, what still exists of the original house? Well, right. Is the knob and tube wiring the same, or have you rewired it?
Probably the foundation.
The foundation, maybe the walls, right. But you've replaced the roof. Like you said, you've had to paint everything. You've redone the plumbing, maybe multiple times, the electrical. When you bought your house 100 years ago, it probably didn't have internet cable in it.
Probably not.
Of course, you're all Wi-Fi now, so it's not a big deal. But all of this stuff is constantly getting replaced. I'm told that in Japan, which I've never been to, and so I'm probably completely wrong in what I'm saying, they design houses to last for 20 years.
Well, the reasons for that is the number of natural disasters in Japan. You can have typhoons, you can have hurricanes, you can have volcanoes,
tsunamis,
earthquakes, you name it at all. So the houses there were designed to be disposable.
And so when you buy a new house, you knock down the old one and put up a new one.
Right.
Okay. I guess
climate's a little nicer than ours.
Well, it is.
You can't really do that in Ontario.
It's harder, and I guess you get exactly the house you want, but I think that's kind of the way you should think of a house, that you're going to blow it up and start over, just not all at once.
I'm going to call your wife when we finish this show and tell her that
what are we
he's
doing?
Blowing up the house this weekend.
Well, but I mean, I'm sure you have the same conversations with your wife. Well, we should redo the kitchen. We should redo the bathroom. We should do this. We should do that. And eventually, all of those things.
You redo everything.
Yeah, you end up redoing everything. So, point number 6 on my list here, reasons not to buy a home. You can't easily get away from your crazy neighbors.
Right. If you're renting it, you can, neighbors are a good reason to just, okay, lease is up, I'm gone.
And if I'm living in an apartment, well, I'll go live in the apartment across the street. Right. Whereas if it's a house, a little bit, like you said, you got all the selling costs.
Right.
Now, here's another one that you're very familiar with, but perhaps our listener is not as familiar with, and that is credit creep.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some data here. Explain what I'm talking about when I say credit creep.
Well, so you were saying earlier, 5% of our clients have houses. So you were using that as an argument to kind of suggest that, well, if you got a house, you're probably insolvency proof. But the truth is the ones that own the houses that have to come see us have twice as much unsecured debt as our average client. So the average person comes to see us was about $50,000. The homeowners, other than the mortgage, we're talking another $100,000.
Yeah, so unsecured debt is everything other than your mortgage and your
credit cards, income taxes, payday loans.
Payday loans, got to get that in. So that's a big thing. So why is it then, if I own a house, I understand I've got more debt because I got a mortgage.
Right.
Why do I have more unsecured debt? Why do I have more on credit cards and everything else?
You got more of the other stuff too, though. So when you own a house, you've got to do all those maintenance things we were talking about. You're probably buying, maybe not more furniture, but you're investing in furniture as opposed to getting the disposable IKEA stuff for the rental unit. All of these things, you're keeping up with the Joneses. The people next door got a hot tub. Well, now you got to think about getting a hot tub, all that sort of stuff. It costs more to live in the house, and you don't necessarily make any more money, which means you're probably borrowing to maintain this standard of living.
And so as a result, you get more debt. And you're right. At the house, I got to have a lawnmower. I want to put in a pool. I got to have a barbecue. I got to have a patio set. Then, like you said, all the new furniture and everything else and the ongoing repairs. If I'm living in a rental unit, well, I'm going to be here for 2 or 3 years. I'm not painting the place. What do I care? But when it's your own house, totally different story. And so I don't have the cash to do those things. I put it on credit cards. But the flip side of it is, and you alluded to this earlier, the bank is more willing to lend to you as well.
Because the bank knows if you don't pay them, well, then they could always sell your house, and hopefully that's enough to pay off all these unsecured debts as well.
So because you have mortgage debt, they're willing to give you a bunch of other debt as well.
Correct.
And is it just because I own the house?
Well, again, remember earlier on the show I said it's a different mindset. If you're a homeowner, they're assuming that you've put down roots and that you're making an investment not only in the home but in the community. And therefore, I guess you're less of a flight risk. You're not just going to go to Alberta for that new oil patch job.
Well, I guess in order to buy the house up front, you had to have good enough credit to buy the house.
To qualify, and you had to have the discipline to save, unless mom and dad gave you the down payment.
And I guess if mom and dad gave you the down payment, which is the only way anyone can buy a house these days, well, maybe mom and dad can also bail you out if something else happens.
Or mom and dad are going to die in the next 5 years, and you're just waiting for them.
There you go.
It's all sad.
Kind of sick. But so the answer is that you are a better credit risk. So let's talk about the numbers then. So you said that a person who does not own a home compared to someone who does own a home, their debts are half as much.
Correct. Their unsecured debts are half as much. We're not even talking about the mortgage.
Yeah. So we, in our annual Joe Debtor study, and obviously we've already talked about that on the show, all our clients, it was around $54,000 in unsecured debt. If you just carve out the homeowners, it was almost $100,000.
Right.
And obviously in all of the debts were the homeowners as well, even though they were a small number. So credit cards, what's the relative magnitude of the difference of credit card debt between homeowners and not?
So it doubles. Average of all of our clients, $16,000. Homeowners, $32,000.
And then personal loans, which would be things like lines of credit, not payday loans, everything else.
Everything except for payday loans.
It's more than double.
That's right. It's about $19,000 for all of our clients, $45,000 just for homeowners.
And that would be things like, I got a line of credit to be doing this, doing that, whatever. Right. Okay, payday loans. Let's talk about that because we haven't talked about that on the show for, 15 minutes. I would think that if you're a homeowner and you have many hundreds of $1,000s owing on a mortgage, you've got some equity, you would not be getting a payday loan, but that's not true.
No, the payday loans are $3,200 for all of our clients, $3,600 for homeowners. So we're going to call it a comparable number.
Yeah, which is still scary.
Well, it's staggering. $3,600 to just the interest on that every month
is a big number. And then homeowners also owe more in tax debt.
Right, which is interesting. So all of our clients on average, $9,400. Homeowners, $13,000.
So, and maybe the reason for that is, well, homeowners have higher income, and as a result, they end up incurring more for taxes.
Yeah, that's part of it. And the tax department are, I don't remember the term anymore, involuntary creditors, right? Mm-hmm. They're the people you don't pay first because they're not hounding you. Well, homeowners, you've got all these other commitments to pay, so it makes sense that your taxes would be higher.
Yep. I'm definitely paying my mortgage every month because number one, it comes out automatically, and number two, well, I got to have a place to live. So
I got to be able to use my credit card to pay these other things. So I'm going to make that payment. I don't hear from the tax guys till the end of the year.
So we can let them slide. So, okay, so let's end the show with practical advice. And we've given the pitch both sides.
Right.
Own a home, don't own a home.
Don't live in an RV. That's a bad idea.
Well,
I'm sorry, we're not talking about this.
Maybe that's a good idea because it would probably be cheaper than $1 million home.
Diesel, expensive.
Okay, so there you go. Depends if you're driving it or not.
Right.
So what is your practical advice then when someone is listening to this and going, okay, well, I'd like to buy a home. I don't know. How do I think it through?
So the first advice is always the same to everybody. Crunch the numbers. Make sure you can actually afford what it is you're getting yourself into. And so doing that as a forecasting exercise is even better. figure out what you can afford to pay every month, and that'll tell you how much you could afford to borrow for the mortgage.
And so what you really need to do is talk to your friends, family members, whatever, who own a home,
Right.
and say, okay, so how much do you pay for everything? Because the obvious thing is, well, the mortgage payment's got to be $2,000 and my rent is $2,500. So this is obviously a better deal.
But you got to have property taxes, you got all your utilities, you got your maintenance costs.
And so it's probably $1,000 or $2,000 more per month to own than rent.
I mean, it's been years since we've done this. We did the math at one point, and it was a minimum of 25% more to own versus renting. I'm sure that number is higher now.
Yeah, depending, because the prices of houses are higher.
Right.
And I think part of that analysis to say, okay, so I'm going to buy this $1 million house and I've got $200,000 for the down payment. Either I'm getting it from my parents or I've saved it, my RSP, my new home buyer's plan, whatever. What if I was to take that $200,000 and invest it?
Sure.
And rent. So my monthly costs are probably less to rent than to own.
Correct.
And I've also got the ability to earn a return on that capital. So now I don't know how you do that analysis because you don't know what you're going to earn.
I'll assume you're going to get 5%, something conservative.
But you said to put it all in Bitcoin, so you're probably going to double every.
I've never told anybody to buy
we've never
Bitcoin.
said that. So yeah, and it's a difficult analysis to do, but okay, put in the assumptions then.
Well, even if you assume you get nothing, right? So all you do is you retain your $200,000 minus whatever the difference is every month between the rent and your housing costs. You're still going to be ahead. Yeah,
if it's cost $1,000 a month to to own than to rent, then at the end of a year, you're $12,000 ahead.
And those are after-tax dollars.
Right. It's real money. So I think doing that number crunching makes sense. Now, you use the term keeping up with the Joneses. I don't know what you got against the Joneses. They're perfectly nice people.
There aren't any Smiths on my street.
There you go. So I think it's important to recognize that that's a factor then.
It's a real factor. Anybody living in whatever neighborhood you're living in, even renters have the same issue. Your kids have got to have the latest version of PlayStation, whatever the hell that is. And your cars have got to be whatever, your landscaping got to, it applies. So recognize when there's peer pressure kicking in and you're doing things not because you want to, because everybody else is doing it and you think you have to.
Yeah. If everybody on the street has a pool, you feel that you need to have a pool.
Right.
Even though you hate swimming. And
it's silly because everybody else has one.
Yeah, go swim at their house. Right, exactly right. But so, yes, recognize that is certainly an issue. Now, when you go to get a mortgage, they make you pass a stress test.
Right.
And the stress test basically says, well, if the interest rates are a couple points higher, could you afford it? I'm oversimplifying, but that's the gist of it. Do you agree that you should do your own stress test and say, well, what happens if I lose my job? What happened? How would you do your own stress test?
Well, so a fact of life is that people don't plan to get into financial trouble. It just happens. But one of the reasons is because they didn't have any sort of safety net or plan in place in case something bad happens. And so a stress test is just another way of saying, what have you got set aside for a rainy day? How many things can go wrong in your life before you're in trouble?
Yeah. What happens if I lose my job? What happens if I want to move to a different job? What if I have a kid? What if I get married? All those different things.
Right.
If you're renting, you're a little bit more flexible. Although I guess things can happen when you're renting too.
Of course.
So you got to kind of think through what are all the things that could happen, and am I in a safer position owning or renting? If you've got a house that's paid for, well, then I guess you're in a safer position owning because, okay, I lose my job. Well, I don't have to pay rent, so I'm good.
You still got utilities, property taxes, and maintenance. There's still...
Yeah, there are still costs. Now,
issues.
Presumably those costs would be less than what you would be paying in rent because there is no capital cost to it. But who knows?
Right.
And I think that's kind of our concluding point. You got to crunch the numbers to see and make the decision yourself. And it's not just the numbers. It's like you say, your lifestyle as well.
Right.
If you're like, hey, you know what? We love going on lots of vacations every year. Great. Get a small apartment because that way you can lock it and leave as opposed to having a big house that you're not there all the time.
Right.
So you got to think about your own lifestyle. Obviously, this is a debt show. And so we're big believers in keeping those numbers as low as possible. Fantastic. So there you go. I will close by repeating good old myth number 13 from Straight Talk on Your Money. I alluded to it already. In my view, a house is not an investment. Yeah, I know. You look at a historical period of time, they've gone up in value.
Right.
But I think of it as like a consumer good. It's something you consume. So if you think of it that way, I think it's a little easier to make the financial decisions. Or not. You can leave comments on YouTube or wherever and tell us why we're completely wrong. That's kind of the whole point of this. So please like, subscribe, notification bell. You know the whole bit. We're on YouTube. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of them. New show every Saturday morning, including next Saturday morning. There you go. That is our show for today. Until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30. Look at that. 30 minutes.